All right. Yeah, so this is our second meeting. The first one was just to have the, along with the annual conference and to gauge interest. And I took over Jan's role, so I hear feedback. I hear feedback. Not sure from where. So I just started to have access to the. I'm going to mute somebody here. Okay. Yeah, so I just started to have access to some of the social platform for this sake, like the emails and things like that. So sorry for the delay. So today, Jack and I, we kind of team tagging on this talk. It's meant to be, a conversation, and we telling our stories and hoping others will do the same. Or if you have challenges, feel free to discuss about those. All right. Let's see. Okay. So this is my first paper that I published back in 2010. So I was doing my master's thesis back then. So in the summer of 2008, I did my fieldwork, and I think I registered like an independent study course with my advisor, Andy Ford. So I was in Vietnam, visiting farmers, talking to them. Some of them are shrimp farmers, some of them just doing, rice and other crops. And so for the Mekong Delta is the coastal area. So they have seawater intrusion problem. And then, so shrimp farming back then, it was kind of like the new thing, right? Exciting. So for some of the farmers, they stay with rice because either they don't have the capital to invest in new equipment, new setup. And so they look at the shrimp farmer and say, oh gosh, those people, harvest a lot of shrimp, they build new houses, that's so exciting. And then when I talk to other farmers, that if they're successful, then they say, oh yeah, shrimp farming is the way to go. But then other shrimp farmers, they're not so successful. And it was kind of sad because I was going with a person from the government entity, and they go with a banker too. And the reason why the banker was there is because that farmer had two continuously failed crops. So he didn't harvest anything. He didn't have any income to pay back the bank. And then there are also problems with, like the baby shrimp that they get is not local, so they cannot control the quality. And they say you prepare the pond, you prepare the water and everything, and you put the shrimp in there, but you don't know if it's good or not after a little bit, say a month or two. And if you start seeing shrimp swimming and things like that, then you start feeding them, and then you got good baby shrimp. Otherwise, it's very risky in many aspects. There are also concerns on the water quality. So people say before the water quality was good. So, a lot of farmers have wonderful harvests, but now the quality is going down. So there are more and more failure. And some people say, well, I have an approach that I might not use as much of the seed, so I won't harvest as much, but at least I keep my crop kind of stable. So every week, like I kind of email Andy about my, conversation with farmers, and at the end of the summer, I'm totally confused. Like, what am I supposed to model, right? Is it water quality, or is it land use, a pilot farm, or what am I supposed to do? So the first week I got back to the fall semester, and then I showed Andy a model, and what I was trying to do is to model the the tidal effect, because all the farmers I talked to, it's a semi-diurnal tidal effect. So all of their livelihoods depend on how the tide moves, right? So if the tide moves out, then all the pollution will go out, but they have less water in the system. And then, and also for the crop farmers, they depend largely on the tidal effect. And so Andy told me, well, so you're trying to force the model to produce the behavior that you want to see. So you're not really model a system with all the feedbacks and things like that. So I go, oh my gosh, like, I don't know what I'm doing, like, this is so hard. So yeah, so as you can see, all the questions that I ask myself, like, what should I model or what can be modeled? How should I think in stocks and flows, right? Because I took the environmental modeling course. I took some independent study course to improve my modeling skill, but those are predefined problems. They told me what are the stocks, what are the flows, how to model those. And now, when I face with this real problem, I don't know, how to think in stocks and flows. And then, how to measure success, right? Or what should be the benchmark? How do we see things change over time? And then at what level of complexity should I include? So luckily, Andy was there for me. So we were able to finish the study, and we decided the focus should be on, the learning process. So the reason why people were excited about shrimp farming was because in the initial years, there were some pilot farms and they were extremely successful. Right, because all the environment conditions is new, everything's fresh, so they were successful. And then after a while, those pilot farms moved away. But the lingering impact is still there. People still look at the pilot farms, and of course, they weighing the options, they want to observe, and then after a while, they say, okay, I'm going to do shrimp farming. Of course, there's a risk, because once you convert to shrimp farming, the soil will become very salty, right? So after that, you cannot go back to rice farming. So it's a dead end if you choose to go there. And I mean, there are other challenges too. So which stakeholders' perspective should I include in the model, right? Is it just the farmers, or the governmental agency, or or even between the shrimp farmer and the rice farmer. And then we talk about sustainability, right? The triangle that we are all aware of, right? The social, the economic, and the environment. But again, how to measure sustainability is not easy. And then some of the things that we heard, for some, it's like the rule of thumb. So would those be inputs for the models, or they are the benchmarks, so that when we validate the model, we use those data? And also, like, I had no idea what kind of impacts that my research would lead to. So thanks to Andy's guidance, so the approach was to focus on the physical system. So we thought, okay, let's focus on land use, right? So the land area is fixed, and then people just decide how to switch from one method of farming to the next, whether it's rice or shrimp. And then they observe the pilot farm. And then the decision to transition or to convert is through observe the profit from shrimp farming. So we have a little bit of mechanism of, pricing for the shrimp, not as complex, but at least it shows when you have more supply of shrimp in the market, the price goes down. And then also take into account some of the initial costs, etc. The next thing is understand how people make decisions. So the learning process, the profit decision, and also like how how much post larva or the baby shrimp or the seed that they want to use. Because when they want to have good harvest, so they tend to use more seed. But then again, when you have more seed, then you have to feed them more, right? So the water quality becomes worse. And if you, and the channel, it's impacted by the tidal effect. So the water is not always fresh and things are stagnant at some point as well. And one thing that Andy taught me is, oftentimes when we learn about system dynamics and we think, oh, we have a great tool and we can help, save the world. But the reality is when we talk to people, we start to know, oh, we know nothing about it. People in the system, they know the system so well. Sometimes they don't make the right decision in our mind because they have different constraints and they value different things more than us. So that was my story. Jack, do you want to share your screen, or are you okay with me sharing my screen? You might want to unmute yourself because I muted you and I had heard the echo.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. How are we doing on time here?
We still have a lot of time.
Okay, we can try sharing my screen.
Okay.
Okay. So can you see my screen here?
Not yet.
Okay. Not. Let's see. Do I need to make a choice of some kind?
Right. So when you hit share screen, you have to pick a screen. I don't know if you have two screens or one screen, but you have to pick.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that I had to initiate it. Okay. More actions. Let's see.
It's up by the camera. There's the camera, the mute, and then or the little microphone, and then there's a kind of rectangle with an up arrow.
Yeah.
That's the share content button.
Yeah.
If you click on that, and then you can select what you want to share, whether it's the app or the screen.
Okay, showing me desktop window. Let's see. Okay, let's try this. Okay. I'm sorry. Let's see here. Sorry about all this. Can you see this?
I think we're seeing both your screen. Well, maybe. I feel like we're seeing both your screens. We can see the PowerPoint on the left, and then we see some, I don't know, text and
Word
files
document. Yeah.
Is it legible? Is it large enough to read?
I
Maybe.
think it is.
Yeah.
Okay, because I have a large screen. There are two windows side by side.
Yep, we can see it all.
Okay. Okay. Can you read that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, hello everybody. I'm new to this group, and I'm an independent researcher, not a PhD, working on the environmental sustainability problem. My background is in business management and consulting, bachelor's in systems engineering from Georgia Tech. Let me take a sip. The systems engineering training turned out to be very, very useful. It gave me a real strong systems perspective. But after 20 years of consulting and business management, a friend of mine working with Sierra Club had a huge impact on how the Sierra Club was approaching the climate change problem in the United States. He developed a new approach to lawsuits against coal plants in the United States. It worked like a charm, and he started in the Georgia area where I am, and they replicated it all across the country, and I was quite impressed. So I said to myself, you know, there's a much bigger problem to solve than all these little problems I've been solving for businesses, and that is the sustainability problem. So I left the business world and founded Thwink.org in 2001, a very small think tank. It's mostly me and a few collaborators. And after 2 years, I reached 2 strategic conclusions. So this was the first conclusion. That's why I'm here. I think systems dynamics has a lot of potential. And I'm a self-taught modeler from Sturman's Business Dynamics book and other things. The other conclusion was my specialty in consulting was process design and improvement. It might be a whole company, it might be a production process, it might be a project management process, et cetera, et cetera. So my perspective of the sustainability problem was not what is the solution, but rather why are we failing to find a solution? And my conclusion was that the problem-solving process that was being used was incapable of solving the problem. If it was going to work, it should have worked because we'd already had 30 years since, say, the Limits to Growth report in 1972. So that gave me some direction, and it gave Thwink.org a single focus. How can we design a new process that was capable of solving the sustainability problem? So this gave Thwink.org a goal. I had lots of small collaborators, and they gave me a lot of help and a lot of ideas. And the idea more and more became, how can we switch from antiquated tools that don't work to new ones that do? They look like they'll work, but they don't, judging by results. So now we can take a look, not at Jack's approaches, but Thwink.org's approaches. And they all pretty much come down to the concept of process-driven problem solving. Like Ruby, I noticed when you were talking about your paper and your master's work in shrimp farming, you never did really mention a process that you were following. And once you see what I'm talking about here, you might get some ideas and say, oh, you know, maybe if I had a process that I was improving as I went along, it might help. And the same may hold for others who have various problems that have given them fits. You know, they're so hard to solve. So as I mentioned, my specialty was process design and improvement. And so I'm a strong believer that the right process will produce the right results. The best example we have by far is the scientific method. Well, once you've got a hypothesis, that process will help you test your hypothesis so that you can create reliable new knowledge. Whereas before invention of the scientific method, there was no process for producing reliable new knowledge. There was only tradition. But we've got a question. As the Thwink.org research was proceeding, you know, it was obviously needed something more. We needed something more than systems dynamics modeling and a problem-solving process. So what could that be? And eventually we zeroed in on the very powerful business tool of root cause analysis. How many of you all are familiar with root cause analysis? Okay, so it's very much a business tool. You seldom, if ever, see it in social problems. In terms of government work, you only hear it about in the technical areas, like NASA uses it, and people use it for incident investigation. But business world uses it all over the place, and I was slightly familiar with it, so I became very familiar with it. So root cause analysis is the systematic practice of finding, resolving, and preventing the recurrence of root causes of causal problems. A causal problem is any problem that arises from a cause, like an infection or a car that won't start. It's not an information search problem. Scientific discovery is an information search problem. System optimization, even using a model, is an information search problem rather than a causal problem. But if you have a causal problem, such as the sustainability problem, or quite probably a shrimp farming problem, then root cause analysis can help. But again and again, I kept looking to see if it had been applied on any social problems, and I couldn't. I even found one book, a large World Wildlife Fund funded project, and the title was The Root Causes of the Biodiversity Problem. But if you studied the project closely, they never actually used true root cause analysis. They only used the buzzword of root causes. So I was a little disappointed, but that's the way it is. So anyhow, it took 7 years, 2003 to 2009, to develop the new process while simultaneously applying it to the environmental sustainability problem. And the result was the system improvement process. So let me do a time check and see if we have room enough to show you something else. Okay. So on my right, this is the thwink.org website, which is quite extensive. And here's the glossary page on process-driven problem solving. But I'm about to take a look at the system improvement process. Now, we're not going to get in any details, but what you're looking at here is a very sophisticated process. So I'm going to just show you one little thing about this process, something that might be small enough to be digestible in a few minutes. And namely, it's social force diagrams. When you have a problem, maybe you can see my mouse, but you start with the symptoms of the problem, and using the concept of root cause analysis, you keep asking, why does this happen, until you find the root cause. Why does the symptoms of a problem happen? Well, you'll find the intermediate causes, which the systems dynamics literature also calls proximate causes. And if it's a difficult problem, you've already had solution failure. So you can say, now, what were the intermediate causes? And that's probably what my superficial solutions were trying to solve. But because there's a deeper cause, the root causes, my superficial solutions were pushing on low leverage points and couldn't really have much impact. But using root cause analysis, you can find the root causes and the related high leverage points. You'll notice the systems dynamics literature talks a lot about high leverage points. For example, Donella Meadows has got a list of the 10 or so high leverage points. And the idea is you can find your root cause, find the high leverage points for resolving it, and then develop fundamental solutions that have a good chance of working because you're resolving the root causes. Okay. So is this making any sense? Let me pause for questions. I'm not getting much of a reaction, so I don't know if it's making any sense or not. Maybe it's too abstract. So let me try to give a concrete example. Pardon me while I open up a document. Let's see here. Okay.
don't know if others have experience with this, but I've done a ton of root cause analysis, so this totally makes sense to me, and I understand where you're headed with the kind of alternate. I don't know if that's true for others or.
That's good to hear.
Jack here.
That's very good to hear. Yeah. Okay. Pardon me for taking so long to find this, but this is a very concrete example. So this, is that readable?
Yep.
Yep.
At least on my
Okay, I
screen.
can make it even a little bigger. Okay, this is the social force diagram for one of the 4 subproblems of the sustainability problem, namely the subproblem dealing with how to overcome change resistance. Namely, we know what we should do technically. We got lots of technical solutions for achieving better sustainability, but we don't want to do them. There's a lot of pushback from the system. This is called change resistance. And the resistance takes its form in these symptoms of successful opposition to passing proposed laws for solving a sustainability problem. And so this diagram finds an intermediate cause, namely system acceptance of the fallacious paradigm that economic growth is good above all else. You'll notice that all nations have a very, very strong pro-growth policy. It's only a few nations, mostly some of the enlightened European Union nations and Costa Rica, that are saying, you know, sustainability is just as important as economic growth. But if you look at the United States, China, Russia, all of the developing countries, you'll see that they're pushing for economic growth. And so the superficial solution to this has been more the truth in the form of technical research, environmental magazines, campaigns, marches, et cetera, lobbying, jawboning. And you'll see this at the eco summits, all of this, and it has just not quite worked. But the analysis said, hey, there's a root cause. Namely, this gets a little complex, so I'm not going to go into it deeply. But we're using a simulation model, systems dynamics, we found that there were 2 feedback loops pitted against each other, a race to the bottom among politicians pitted against a race to the top. And the race to the bottom represented special interests, strong special interests, notably large for-profit corporations, which if you follow the money, they drive the government behavior in democracies. And that was causing huge pushback. And this is well documented in a number of books. And so once you have found this inherent advantage, you can say, aha, another name for this root cause is low political truth literacy. The average voter can't tell when they're being fooled. And so they elect politicians who say one thing, but once they're in office, they're working for strong, powerful special interests. And it's easy to show this is in the case in nearly all democratic countries. So anyhow, this is a very tangible example here. It's very, very much written up on the thwink.org website. You can come back and study it at any time. So I'm trying to race through this and get a first pass through it so we have time to discuss it and ask questions. So do we have any questions on what I've presented here?
Jack, I concur with the point that you've gotten to, okay, about the root cause.
Yes.
But you can't fix stupid, okay? There is no amount of logic that will fix stupid.
Well, thank you.
You cannot have a rational discussion with them.
Thank you. So what I didn't mention is we agree it's a large problem to fix low truth literacy. And so what I haven't mentioned here is we have run a controlled study on truth literacy training. we ran the study in fall of 2019, and we discovered that there were 30 subjects per group, and the control group, we measured their political truth literacy as below 10%, and it was measured by them being exposed to political claims, typical political claims that had one of 7 different fallacies in it. And then some of them were true. So they had to guess the truth of each claim. So using that, we found that truth literacy in the average person, these were American subjects, an online panel, the average truth literacy is below 10%. And I won't mention the second control group, that's a little complicated, but the third control group had full truth literacy training. And after 60 minutes of training, their political truth literacy rose to 70%. And a follow-up study 26 days later showed that it only fell 10 percentage points. So I agree, it's very hard to fix stupid, but we're seeing it's possible. We have also found research on similar training that didn't deal with political truth literacy, but it dealt with truth literacy, and it achieved, I would say, slightly similar results. So I'm glad you brought that question up because it was our biggest question too.
How'd you get them to participate?
To participate.
In other words, I listened to what you've described, and I agree with it, that if a person is willing to undergo some amount of learning, you can change the level of truth literacy. But for those people who you can't even get to undergo it because they won't even get in the room with you.
Okay, thanks. That's a question we at Thwinkorg have encountered several times because we've been talking to a lot of people about our research. We don't expect at all to change the views of those who are already indoctrinated, such as here in the United States, who are in the Trump cult. And there's no need to improve the truth literacy of those who are already pretty good at spotting the truth. So you're left with what can be called swing voters, and more importantly, you're left with the young. That is, they're not indoctrinated, they don't have strong habits yet, their truth literacy training is still very pliable, et cetera, et cetera. And so as far as we can tell, truth literacy could be very easily taught along with the other types of literacy in public education systems. It can also be promoted online and even insinuated into news reporting. For example, here's this story, and let me tell you about the fallacy that was used. You know, there was so much cherry picking here. And just as part of talking about the news, they can educate listeners or readers on what the cherry picking fallacy is. So does that help?
Well, but you got to get them to quit listening to Fox News.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
It's a big story. Any other questions, observations?
So Jack, I have a comment. So I think in the system dynamics world, we don't use the term root cause analysis, but we still draw the causal loop and understand the causal effect. So and if you read the book Modeling the Environment by Andy Ford, there's a process in that book too. So it goes with A, B, C, D, R, S, T. So A is to be acquainted with the problem. B is to be specific about the behavior or the pattern of the system. And then C is, you construct the stock and flows. D is to draw a causal loop diagram. Then R is to run the model. You do S is sensitivity analysis, etc. So there's a process. I think it's just the lingo itself is different.
Well,
Thanks.
Jack, can I jump in here?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I've read a lot of Jack's stuff, and it's really good. I mean, he's gone into it in far more depth and detail than any other process that I have found. I'm wrestling with the ability to affect what you learn that you need to do with the context that you have to do it in. Okay, the process is amazing. So I'll shut up now.
Okay, yeah, that helped. Thank you. Well, Ruby, I think you're saying, for example, there's this process and it roughs out an approach to solving a problem using systems dynamics modeling. And it finds causes even though it doesn't use the term root cause analysis. So I haven't looked at exactly the process you just mentioned, but I've looked at other processes, and there's a subtle but significant differences between explicit root cause analysis and other approaches. And I'm not sure I can explain that right now, but the difference is very significant. So if Ruby, if you and others are at all interested in exploring this in depth, Montserrat and I have a paper in progress that's on the Thwink site. I can send everybody links that discusses this exact subject. You know, the need for an explicit approach to root cause analysis in systems dynamics problem solving, and takes SIP and it takes Sturman's process in his book, and it takes the most powerful and appropriate process I could find from the business world, Toyota's practical problem solving process. And it takes all three of those and combines them into a suggested integrated process for systems dynamics modeling that's root cause analysis driven. So that might help to answer your very good question in depth.
Another thought, Jack, is that, you know, when Senge talks about circular causality and causes are their own cause because of the circular nature of it, so that you know, root cause analysis in the typical sense seems to be contradictory to circular causality, though within that set of relationships, there are, as Danella Meadows indicated, there are leverage points that are most appropriate to attempt to address the behavior of the system.
Yes, there are. Yeah, and although a loop does have circular causality, the loop as a whole can contain the root cause. So the loop can be an endpoint in your search for the root cause. And so we found in the dueling loops model for the subproblem you're seeing on the right, that had a loop with a, well, it talks about it right here, this inherent advantage of the race to the bottom. So this loop as a whole contained the root cause. So I have one more item to discuss, and that is a possible project for the Environmental Special Interest Group. So I think this is where we are. Many of us are working on difficult problems, and some of them have a very strong social component, like Ruby's work with shrimp farms. These are difficult, large-scale social problems, and that's exactly what the system improvement process is designed to solve. Let me just bring that up again. Let's see here. Yeah, just so we know what we're talking about. Okay, back to here. So I have an offer. I would be glad, very serious glad, to work very closely with anybody to help them learn SIP or the integrated process in the paper we're working on and apply it to a problem that you are working on. Because we're all struggling and we're all in this together. So if this makes any sense, and we could all work on one project together, we can do most anything we want. We can report on progress and discuss progress, et cetera, and get help from each other in our future meetings. And so something like this, I think, has the potential to make this SIG a very productive group. If things go really well, we could possibly pioneer solution strategies to what had previously seemed to be intractable problems. Okay, any reaction?
Can you provide a link to what you consider the best introductory paper to this process?
Sure. Yeah.
In other words, I'd like maybe an hour or two as opposed to a month.
Oh, of course. And I can show you right here where that link's going to be. See this mega dropped in here, publications, papers.
Okay.
Okay, so here's our papers, journal papers, working papers, right here. This is the paper I've been talking about, the working paper we have in progress. If I click on it, there's the current copy. And, there, whoops, sorry. I was trying to make it big enough to read. That's what it's all about.
So could you drop that link into the chat, please?
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so Jack, thanks for the offer. I think a lot of grad students would benefit from learning the process with you. So unfortunately, today we don't really have any grad students here. So I'd like to hear from Allison or Richard, because you work with, or Jean, because you work with grad students. Do you think that this will be helpful to them?
Yes, definitely.
I think it would. I just sort of thinking of a couple that I know that are involved right now and they're finishing up dissertations. I don't know what their time's like, but I think it'd be good for them if they can get others a little earlier in their career started on it.
Jack, did you find the chat?
I may need to stop sharing to be able to use the chat.
No, it's there. Oh, I see. Maybe you can't see the chat window.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me stop sharing because I'm really done with my part of the presentation. So I've just clicked on stop sharing. Okay. Okay, now I'll try the chat. Let's see here. Show conversation, meeting chat.
Jack, I'm intrigued by how this will apply to the problem that I'm kind of working on right now, which is trying to get homeowners and people who landscape, which is kind of I'll give you a suburban first world problem entirely. But trying to get them to plant more natives rather than, cultivars and invasives, and trying to get them to, grow less lawn and more trees and take care of those trees and try to, agree to, sterilizing deer in their hoods if they won't agree to shoot them as they kill and eat everything that can be browsed, and trying to get them to stop spraying Mosquito Joe to protect them from ticks and mosquitoes and kill every other pollinator as well. and yet still being a $2 billion business for birdseed. So I've been looking at kind of the different ways that this is happening, and talking to people about their, well, I buy this plant because it's pretty and the birds all come and eat the berries, right? Or rather than berries that are better for them prior to migration, which maybe aren't so pretty or not the kind of classic things that we landscape with, are kind of the bits that I was working with. And I was still trying to determine if, we should put it into like a video game, a bit like a few of those COVID games that I see my kids playing, trying to manage the virus and contain it. And looking at just things like the emerald ash borer and kind of wiping out all of our timber. But I'm intrigued to see if maybe, I'd be very interested in trying to see if it works in that. I assume it works in the framework because it looks like a very standard kind of system dynamics framework combined with root cause analysis.
Exactly.
I'd certainly be willing to work on something like that if you're interested. I don't know if others would be interested in joining us as well.
Sure, I'd be glad to help. And it sounds like your average messy problem. It's very complicated, hard to figure out almost where to start.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is changing people's minds and seeing what's effective in doing that, right? We have little glimpses of hope with like monarchs and people, everybody seems to be planting milkweed this year and are happy about the weird looking single milkweeds poking out of different gardens. But what are the other, how else do we influence people that insects are good and possums are good and all of these things that they aspire to this, lovely lawn with one big tree poking out of it and being mowed around, right? Rather than a bit of the messiness that is actually healthy.
Yeah.
So it gets to those kind of, the people that I talk to that I think of as being, the master landscapers and the master gardeners have entirely different goals, right? They're spraying bug spray all over the place when they finally get some bugs, which infect their birds, right? So it is definitely the gnarly problem, and people who think they're doing good are actually doing bad.
Yeah. So anybody who wants to work with me, just go ahead and email me. Let's see. You may not have my address. Let's see.
Yeah, so Jean, it does sound like you need to do some cost benefit analysis as well, right? Because different people value the benefits differently. So if people don't want them all around the tree, yeah, sure, because it takes them longer. So how they value time and things like that.
Absolutely. And frankly, how does it benefit your house cost? Mm-hmm. Right? Landscape cost is very, curb appeal is extremely subjective. And therefore, by planting something that's super healthy, you can actually deteriorate the value of your house if people don't understand what's really going on. Yeah. Or the number of people that offer to mow my lawn in no mow May.
Have any of you watched the movie The Biggest Little Farm?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. It's just...
And my students get extra credit in the watching it and writing up on it.
Yeah, I like the part where they use the ducks to eat the snails.
One of the problems with this landscaping approach is that, the equipment is available to cut grass. But if you want to have tall grass, let's say 2 or 3 feet tall, and let's mow it once a year, it's an entirely different problem. And it's very difficult to do on a larger scale. I mean, I have several acres, only about a half of one is lawn, but I wanted to have some long grass there. And, that's not the way they work. And the equipment, if there's a mower that can do that, it's more like a farm machine and it's much more expensive.
Yeah, my lawn guy has a farm machine that he brings in once a year. And of course, the weather doesn't always cooperate. It may be super, super wet.
So does he just cut the grass and leave it, or does he cut whatever it is and take it away?
I haven't had anybody bundle it as hay yet, but I probably could.
There's someone, anyway, That's one of the issues I see,
It's
because
totally one of the issues, right? That the system is really optimized for the, the once a week lawn guys and the chem lawn guy coming to spray and the Mosquito Joe guy coming to spray and not optimized for people who can actually pull invasives. Yeah, sorry.
It's a real technical problem because you get a lot of biomass that's standing on the landscape, and especially here where you get it matted down in the winter. I mean, I'm in the Ithaca area, so not so far from you. And I've gotten, so I weed whack all my stuff early in the spring so I don't get woody stuff coming in places I don't want it. But still, it's a lot of work. And if you want somebody to do that, it costs more than hiring them just cut the grass. It's crazy. No, it's an interesting problem, though, I think.
Jack?
Yes.
I just made a connection between your truth literacy education and a book by the Heath brothers called Moments, where the summary of the book is you take a clear insight compressed in time, delivered in a manner that allows the audience to discover it. So the audience has an aha moment. So that, and I sense that's what happens in terms of them going through this truth literacy and they're discovering that the truths that they were holding were in fact not true.
Wow. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, we certainly have not got that far in our research. But yes, exactly. It sounds like we're going all the way back to the Enlightenment when people discovered new ways to reason correctly.